You know how you're scrolling through your feed and you inevitably come across one of those perfectly curated, just like almost hypnotic
Oh,
videos?
yeah, the really aesthetic ones.
Exactly. It's usually like a guy in this pristine, perfectly unwrinkled linen shirt, and he's making a slow, meticulous pour-over coffee. Or maybe he's quietly folding laundry in a gorgeously sunlit room.
Right, while his partner grabs her briefcase and, heads out the door to her high-powered corporate job.
Yeah, that exact one. It's the whole stay-at-home boyfriend trend. And I mean, on the surface, it just looks like this quirky, soothing lifestyle aesthetic designed purely for social media.
Right, it looks like a highly filtered luxury, almost like a modern fairy tale that completely ignores the reality of modern bills.
That is the perfect way to describe it. It's so clean and peaceful, but if you scratch just a millimeter beneath the surface of that cinematic filter, you realize, oh wait, it's not just an aesthetic for the internet.
Not at all.
What we are actually looking at is a massive, highly pragmatic economic shift.
Yeah.
And it is actively reshaping modern households. I mean, it's happening all around you right now.
Yeah, we are witnessing a fundamental reorganization of how couples live, how they divide labor, and honestly, how they define value. And it's being driven entirely by necessity, not just a desire for a peaceful morning routine.
So to guide you through this today, we are diving into a really insightful body of work focused on what's being called the domestic revolution. We've gathered a stack of sources for this deep dive, including hard data from the Pew Research Center, extensive local community responses, and some excellent ground-level reporting from the print.
Some really fascinating stuff in there.
It really is. And the mission for our deep dive today is to explore exactly how historic inflation and, well, shifting labor demographics are actively rewriting the rules of romance, of labor, and of household economics for you and everyone else. Okay, let's unpack this, because we need to understand exactly why this shift is happening at this very moment. Like, we need to move past the broad, sunny concept of a stay-at-home partner and look at the harsh economic realities that are essentially forcing this change.
Right. Well, for decades, the traditional relationship followed a very familiar, rigid pattern. Men worked, women managed the domestic sphere.
Right.
That was the blueprint handed down from generation to generation. But today, that blueprint is just being shredded by unavoidable macroeconomic forces.
Shredded is the right word.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about historic inflation, skyrocketing housing costs, and crushing student debt. Those three factors alone are rewriting the rules of how a household has to function just to keep the lights on and the fridge stocked.
The traditional single income structure where one person, historically the man, goes to a job and the other manages the house, it's completely collapsing under the weight of these modern costs.
Totally collapsing.
It's just mathematically impossible for a vast majority of people now. The math simply does not work the way it did in, say, 1985.
It doesn't. And the sources point out something crucial about that mathematical impossibility. This shift away from traditional gender roles isn't just happening in wealthy enclaves where people have the luxury of choice or where they can afford to experiment with lifestyle trends.
Oh, right.
It is highly visible in Black and working-class households, where financial survival absolutely dictates pragmatic choices. When you are looking at mounting rent and grocery bills, traditional gender norms, well, they quickly take a backseat to sheer survival.
Pragmatism really is the operative word there.
Yeah.
The sources make it clear that it's not necessarily a grand political statement these couples are making, right? It's a spreadsheet decision.
Exactly. It's math. If one partner has a stronger, more stable income opportunity regardless of their gender, it simply makes the most financial sense to organize the entire household around protecting and maximizing that reality.
It's like treating the household as a startup.
Yep.
You don't stick to an outdated business model if the company is failing, You pivot to support whoever has the most stable revenue stream.
Right. You adapt.
Yeah, if your startup is bleeding cash, you cut external expenses. And that is where the unpaid domestic labor comes in. Managing meals, maintaining the home, doing the grocery shopping, taking care of the maintenance. That is all unpaid labor that tangibly, measurably reduces overall household expenses.
That is a phenomenal way to look at it, because the savings are incredibly real.
Yeah. You aren't paying for daily takeout because someone was too tired to cook. You aren't paying a premium for a cleaning service. You aren't paying the convenience tax on a dozen different daily tasks because someone is dedicating their full time and energy to managing those logistics. The household it stops leaking money.
And that operational efficiency aligns perfectly with the reporting by the print, which noted that changing labor demographics are actively driving more men toward these home-based roles.
Right.
When a man takes over the household upkeep, it completely frees up his partner to focus on her professional growth. She isn't coming home from a highly stressful job, only to face a second shift of domestic work.
Which is huge.
Huge. She can put all her energy into maximizing that primary income stream, taking on extra projects, or gunning for a promotion.
But, okay, I have to push back here for a second. Treating the home like a startup is a nice, sterile way to look at it on paper. But we are talking about human beings with egos and deep-seated socialization.
Oh, absolutely.
It is hard to believe a guy who was raised with traditional breadwinner expectations is just looking at a household Excel spreadsheet and happily putting on an apron. Is this purely a financial survival tactic, just a cold, hard response to inflation? Or are cultural expectations actually shifting in tandem with this? Because I imagine there is immense psychological friction.
What's fascinating here is that while the initial catalyst is undeniably economic survival, it forces a profound evolution in how we value shared contribution over traditional gender roles.
Okay, so it changes as they do it.
Right. You're absolutely right that ego is involved. But necessity acts as a battering ram against that ego. It starts as a reluctant necessity.
Reluctant, yeah.
The couple looks at their bills, they look at their respective earning potentials, and they make a logical, if sometimes uncomfortable, choice. But in the process of actually living it out, they are actively dismantling those old cultural expectations.
Yeah.
They're proving to themselves day by day that value in a relationship doesn't just come from a paycheck. The spreadsheet forces the behavior, and eventually the culture of the relationship catches up to the behavior.
The startup logic makes perfect sense when you break it down like that. But human ego is rarely logical, and what happens behind closed doors is one thing. Are couples actually executing this pivot on a large scale, or is this just a fringe trend happening in, like, progressive bubbles?
It's definitely not just a fringe trend.
Do we have proof this is scaling beyond a few anecdotal examples on social media?
We have significant proof. The foundational piece of data driving this entire conversation is that women now hold a growing share of payroll jobs. The workforce realities have fundamentally and structurally changed over the last 2 decades.
And the formal family data really illustrates how households are reacting to that workforce change. There is this deeply striking quote from Richard Fry, a senior researcher at the Pew Research Center, highlighted in our sources.
Yeah, that data point is wild.
It is. He notes, quote, "Dads now represent 18% of stay-at-home parents, up from 11% in 1989.
Which represents a massive statistical jump in domestic demographics. We are talking about millions of households fundamentally altering their structure.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Fry's research specifically mentions parents, but the sources argue this finding acts as a massive indicator for the broader acceptance of men taking on home-based responsibilities across the board, even before kids are in the picture.
Right, the stay-at-home boyfriend is the logical precursor to the stay-at-home dad.
Exactly. Add to that the Pew Research Center analysis showing that marriages where spouses contribute equally have risen to 29%. We are looking at a steady, undeniable decline in the traditional male breadwinner model. But I still wonder how open people are about this. Are couples actually admitting to this dynamic?
That's the real tension.
Right, because the numbers say one thing, but what we admit to our neighbors at a barbecue can be very different.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the answer is that society's desperately trying to catch up, but there is immense tangible friction. Labor economists are actively studying these dynamics, not just as some abstract sociological curiosity, but because they directly impact local economies.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this shift changes consumer spending patterns, it alters housing needs, and it impacts local tax bases. It is significant enough that it's actually prompting local community boards to promote financial literacy classes specifically aimed at these non-traditional households.
Wait. Community boards are actively stepping in, like creating curriculums for this.
They have to. When the foundational blueprint of the household changes, people need entirely new tools to build with. Think about standard financial advice for a second.
Okay.
The traditional advice of how to manage a household budget was built for a one-earner, male-led household, or at least a dual-income household where both people have W-2s. Standard advice tells couples to both max out your 401ks. That advice is completely useless when one partner literally has no income to invest.
Oh man, you're right.
People are showing up to financial planners and realizing the old rule book just doesn't apply to them, which leaves them navigating these new arrangements without any historical precedent to rely on.
Which introduces a completely different kind of stress. I mean, the data proves the shift is real and the community response shows it has scale. But the day-to-day reality for you, or for any couple living this out, is absolutely fraught with societal judgment and heavy internal risks.
Oh, totally. The biggest barrier identified across the source material is social stigma. We may have new economic realities forcing these decisions, but society as a whole still largely measures a man's worth by his paycheck.
That is so deeply ingrained in our collective psyche. You go to a dinner party or like a family holiday gathering, and the very first question anyone asks a man is, "So what do you do for a living?"
Always. And the expectation is a recognizable job title and an implied salary. When the answer is, I manage the household logistics so my partner can thrive in her career, the external judgment can be palpable.
Yeah.
Friends and family might view him as unsuccessful, lacking ambition, or even worse, just plain lazy.
Even though, as the sources explicitly point out, high-earning women genuinely appreciate having organized lives. They are immensely relieved to have that domestic support, to not have to worry about the dry cleaning or the grocery shopping after a 10-hour workday.
Exactly.
But the couple still faces intense, often condescending scrutiny from the outside looking in.
And that external pressure, those sideways glances from family members, can easily seep inside the house and poison the dynamic, which leads to the dark side of this arrangement. If there are not incredibly clearly defined divisions of household labor, severe internal resentment begins to build almost immediately.
Going back to our startup metaphor, if he is supposed to be the COO, managing the daily operations of the house, but the house is a disaster and she is still coming home and cooking dinner.
Right, that's a problem.
Now they aren't partners running a successful enterprise. They're roommates where one person isn't pulling their weight.
Furthermore, the financial dependence inherent in this setup can breed incredibly unequal power dynamics. If the working partner uses their income as a tool for control, even subconsciously, the stay-at-home partner can quickly find themselves in a profoundly vulnerable position.
Yeah, if he is the COO running the operations, but she is the sole investor funding the startup, she effectively has all the voting power. How do they prevent a hostile takeover in their own living room?
By recognizing the vulnerability early, the non-earning partner has zero personal savings. They aren't building a 401k. They are entirely reliant on the goodwill of the person signing the checks.
That is terrifying. How do you separate a loving romantic relationship from a transactional employer-employee dynamic if one person holds all the purse strings?
It's so hard.
I mean, if I'm paying all the rent, the utilities, and the grocery bills, and you're doing all the laundry and the cooking, how do we stop it from feeling like I am your boss?
This raises an important question, and it's one that working-class communities in particular are demanding honest conversations about, because a lack of open, structured communication can turn what is meant to be a mutually supportive partnership into a very real trap for both individuals.
Wow.
The earner starts to feel burdened, stressed, and resentful that everything falls on their shoulders financially, while the home manager feels powerless, financially trapped, and devalued.
We clearly need actionable solutions here. And the sources don't just point out these massive pitfalls, the exploitation, the resentment, the stigma. They actually provide a pragmatic playbook for couples trying to navigate this successfully without destroying their relationship.
They offer a very clear roadmap, and it starts with a critical, uncompromising distinction that couples must make right at the outset.
Which is?
Is the partner at home actually performing agreed-upon valuable labor, or are they simply avoiding the discomfort of employment?
That is the ultimate line in the sand. Being a stay-at-home partner is a role, it is a job with heavy responsibilities. It is not an extended, open-ended vacation disguised as a modern relationship trend.
Exactly. Community leaders realize that couples need a tangible framework, almost like a domestic prenup, to evaluate if their home arrangement is actually healthy and functional, or if it is tilting toward exploitation.
A domestic prenup. Okay, so what does that actually look like in practice? Are they logging hours on a timesheet and submitting invoices to each other at the end of the week?
Not quite a timesheet, but it starts with auditing the invisible labor. The framework is based on 3 fundamental questions.
Okay, what's question 1?
Question 1, what specific work is being performed? You have to sit down and literally define the scope of work. It means taking all that invisible labor of running a house and making it visible.
I like that.
Listing out the meal planning, the deep cleaning, the daily errands, the administrative life management, paying the bills, scheduling appointments, and agreeing that this is the formal scope of work.
Which naturally leads to the second part of the audit. Question 2. How does that work actually support the household economically?
Right. This is where you tie the domestic labor directly back to the family economics. Does his taking over the grocery shopping and meal prep save the household $400 a month because they aren't ordering expensive delivery?
Yeah.
Does his managing the home maintenance allow her to take on extra client calls or a promotion that brings in a higher salary? The financial value of the domestic work must be recognized and validated by both people.
It makes the invisible savings visible.
That's so smart. Then there's the third question in this framework, which is probably the most uncomfortable thing a couple can discuss, but absolutely the most necessary. What happens if the relationship ends?
Yeah, nobody wants to talk about that.
Nobody.
But it forces couples to confront the reality of financial vulnerability head on. If the relationship dissolves tomorrow, the earner walks away with their career progression, their salary, and their retirement accounts intact.
And the other person. The stay-at-home partner walks away with a glaring gap in their resume, zero in income, and no safety net.
Which is why the sources highlight this incredibly creative financial mechanism coming out of high-cost metropolitan areas. To solve this vulnerability, couples are setting up shared household budgets alongside individual spending accounts.
Exactly. Instead of letting the primary earner control all the funds in one big pot, they divide it structurally. The household needs, the rent, the groceries, the utilities are met from a shared budget.
Right.
But crucially, both partners receive individual funds that they control completely independently.
Let's dig into the mechanics of that, because I think people might hear that and think the working partner is giving the stay-at-home partner a patronizing weekly allowance.
Oh, no, it is entirely different from an allowance. An allowance implies a parent-child dynamic. This is treated mathematically as a salary equivalent or a fixed operational expense for the household.
Oh, I see.
A predetermined percentage of the household income is deposited directly into an individual account solely in the non-earner's name. They don't have to ask permission to buy a coffee. They can use it to build their own credit. And most importantly, they can build their own emergency savings.
So what does this all mean? It means if you are in this situation, or if you are considering it, you have to treat your financial boundaries with the exact same respect and rigor that you treat your romantic boundaries.
Absolutely.
You have to use these 3 questions to constantly audit your relationship. You need a system that ensures the non-earning partner doesn't feel financially trapped, and the earning partner doesn't feel taken advantage of. It is about actively valuing labor of all kinds, not just the kind that comes with a formal W-2 at the end of the year.
Setting up individual accounts alongside shared budgets isn't about cynically planning for a breakup either. It is the ultimate safeguard against the financial exploitation and the unequal power dynamics we discussed earlier. It gives the stay-at-home partner agency. It structurally says, your contribution to this household is valuable, and you deserve financial autonomy as a direct result of that contribution.
It is formalizing respect. So let's recap this journey we've been on today. We started by looking at how historic inflation, crushing housing costs, and massive student debt essentially killed the traditional single-income model.
Yeah.
We looked at the hard data from Pew showing the undeniable rise of equal contribution marriages and the shift in labor demographics driving this change.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We explored the heavy social hurdles, the stigma, and the internal resentment that couples face when they try to buck centuries of traditional gender roles.
Yeah.
And finally, we walked through the practical playbook, those 3 essential audit questions and the mechanics of dual account budgets needed to actually make this modern arrangement work without someone getting exploited.
All of those frameworks are essential. But I want to leave you with a final unmentioned implication from the text to ponder.
Okay, let's hear it.
The sources we explored today focus heavily on how this setup protects the household's immediate economic survival today. It solves today's inflation problem and today's stress. But think about the long game.
The long game, right?
If a relationship does end, or if the economic winds shift yet again and the stay-at-home partner suddenly needs to re-enter the workforce, what does a stay-at-home boyfriend actually put on a resume after 5 years out of the formal labor market?
Oof. You can't just write manage logistics, supply chain, and crisis response for a 2-person startup and hope the hiring manager gets the metaphor.
Exactly. How will the corporate world value the intensive, unpaid domestic management, the budgeting, the scheduling, and the logistics that this entire new generation of men is taking on? We are actively redefining household economics, but the corporate labor market has not caught up to how it should value that gap in a traditional resume.
Wow. And until they do catch up, the serene stay-at-home aesthetic you see in those perfectly lit social media videos is going to carry a very real, hidden, and heavy risk. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking past the filter, and we will catch you next time.